The bloodied sun sank below the dusty horizon of Shoshone City, Wyoming Territory, casting long shadows across Eleanor Bennett's broken wagon as she struggled to rise from the ground, her strength all but gone after 3 days without water. The year was 1876, and the unforgiving wilderness of the American frontier had claimed yet another victim, or so it seemed, until the silhouette of a lone rider appeared against the crimson sky, his broad shoulders and the distinct shape of his Stetson hat unmistakable in the fading light. Bethany Evans clutched her side, feeling the sharp pain of what she suspected were broken ribs. The stagecoach robbery had left her stranded miles from town, the other passengers either dead or scattered to the winds. Her fine traveling dress, once a symbol of her Eastern refinement, was now torn and stained with blood and dirt. 3 days of dragging herself toward what she hoped was civilization had left her delirious with thirst and pain. When she heard the approaching hoofbeats, Bethany tried once more to stand, fear giving her a momentary surge of strength. Outlaws often returned to the scenes of their crimes, and a woman alone would make easy prey. But her legs betrayed her, buckling beneath her weight as she collapsed back into the dust. "Please," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp as the rider drew closer. "I have nothing left to take." The horseman dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the ground. He approached cautiously, hands visible to show he meant no harm. In the dying light, Bethany could make out a weathered face beneath the shadow of his hat, eyes the color of a summer storm scanning her with concern. "Madam," he said, his voice deep yet gentle, "you're hurt." Bethany tried again to rise, dignity demanding she not remain sprawled in the dirt before this stranger. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice breaking as she failed once more to stand. The cowboy crouched beside her, offering a canteen. "Drink slow," he instructed as she grabbed for it with desperate hands. "Name's Samuel Garrett. Most folks call me Sam." Bethany sipped the lukewarm water, feeling life return to her parched body. "Bethany Evans," she managed between careful swallows. "I was on the eastbound stage. Robbers." She couldn't finish, the memory too fresh. Samuel nodded grimly, understanding without words. He looked toward the setting sun, then back to her. "Night's coming fast and you're in no condition to travel. My ranch is about 3 miles south. Can you ride?" Bethany attempted again to stand, determination in every line of her face. Her legs trembled violently beneath her, and she stumbled forward. Samuel caught her before she could fall, his strong arm steadying her. "You're too weak to stand," he observed, no judgment in his tone. Then, with a gentle smile that transformed his rugged features, he added, "Then lean on me till you can walk again." Something in those simple words, offered without expectation, broke through Bethany's carefully constructed defenses. She had come west with dreams of independence, determined to prove that a woman could make her own way. Now, as she leaned against the solid warmth of this stranger, she felt not defeat but a curious sense of connection. Samuel helped her to his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion that stood patiently as he lifted her onto its back. "This is Thunder," he said, patting the animal's neck. "Gentlest horse in Wyoming Territory, despite his name." He swung up behind her, one arm securely around her waist. "Just relax against me, Miss Evans. I'll have you safe before full dark." As they rode through the gathering twilight, Bethany found herself surrendering to the strength of the man behind her. Her head rested against his chest, the steady beat of his heart a reassuring rhythm. She had left Philadelphia to escape an arranged marriage to a man 3 times her age, carrying nothing but the clothes on her back and her teaching credentials. She had been headed to Shoshone City, to take up a position as the town's schoolteacher when fate intervened in the form of masked bandits. Almost there, Samuel's deep voice rumbled against her back, pulling her from her thoughts. Ahead, Bethany could make out the dark shape of buildings against the night sky. As they drew closer, she saw a modest but well-maintained ranch house with a barn and several outbuildings. A lantern burned in the window, a beacon of safety in the wilderness. A woman emerged from the house as they approached, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, face lined with years of sun and wind. "Samuel Garrett, what have you brought home this time?" she called, her tone scolding but affectionate. "Miss Bennett needs help, Mrs. Fletcher," Samuel explained as he carefully dismounted, then reached up to help Bethany down. "Stagecoach robbery." "Lord have mercy," the older woman said, hurrying forward. "Bring her in, bring her in." "I'll heat water for a bath." Mrs. Fletcher, Samuel's housekeeper since the death of his parents 10 years prior, took charge with brisk efficiency. Within an hour, Bethany found herself clean, her wounds tended, dressed in a borrowed nightgown, and tucked into a soft bed in the ranch house's spare room. The older woman had examined her injuries with gentle hands, declaring the ribs bruised but not broken, and had applied salves and bandages where needed. "You just rest now, child," Mrs. Fletcher said, placing a cup of willow bark tea on the bedside table. "The morning will look brighter, as it always does." Left alone, Bethany struggled against the exhaustion pulling at her. Despite her aching body's demand for rest, her mind raced with questions about her rescuer. Samuel Garrett was not what she had expected to find in Wyoming Territory. There was a quiet intelligence in his eyes, a gentleness in his hands that belied his rugged appearance. He had treated her with respect, asking nothing in return for his aid. Sleep finally claimed her, but her dreams were troubled, filled with the sounds of gunshots and screams, the terrified faces of her fellow passengers as the stagecoach was attacked. She woke with a gasp just before dawn, heart pounding, sweat cooling on her skin despite the chill in the air. "Just a dream," she whispered to herself. "Just a dream." But it wasn't. The memories were real, and the realization that she had survived when others had not weighed heavily on her conscience. Why had she been spared? What purpose did her continued existence serve? The soft glow of sunrise began to filter through the curtains, bringing with it the sounds of life on a working ranch. The distant lowing of cattle, the neigh of horses, the rustle of activity as the day began. Bethany pushed herself up in bed, testing her strength. The pain in her side was still present but duller now, and when she swung her legs over the side of the bed, they supported her weight, if shakily. A soft knock at the door preceded Mrs. Fletcher's entrance, bearing a tray with a simple breakfast of eggs, bacon, and biscuits. "Thought you might be awake," the housekeeper said with a smile. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Better, thank you," Bethany replied, realizing she was ravenous. "I'm afraid I've imposed on your kindness too much already." Mrs. Fletcher waved away her concern. "Nonsense. Samuel would never forgive himself if he'd left you out there to die. Besides, it's nice having another woman around the place." She set the tray across Bethany's lap. "Eat up now. Samuel's gone into town to report the robbery to Sheriff Taylor, but he left some clothes that might fit you. His sister's things, from before she married and moved to Colorado." After breakfast, dressed in a simple but well-made calico dress that hung a bit loose on her frame, Bethany made her way slowly through the house. It was larger than it had appeared last night, solidly built with care and attention to detail. The furnishings were practical rather than ornamental, but there were touches that spoke of a woman's hand curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt draped over the back of a rocking chair, dried flowers arranged in a pottery vase on the mantel. She found Mrs. Fletcher in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with strong, capable hands. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Bethany asked from the doorway. The older woman looked up, flour dusting her forearms. "You should be resting, Miss Evans." "I've rested enough," Bethany insisted. "And please call me Bethany. After all, you've seen me at my worst and still offered kindness." Mrs. Fletcher's weathered face softened into a smile. "Then you must call me Martha, and if you're determined to help, you can shell those peas over there." She nodded toward a basket on the table. As they worked side by side, Bethany learned more about Samuel Garrett and his ranch. His parents had been among the first settlers in the area, establishing the Diamond G Ranch when Samuel was just a boy. They had died within months of each other from influenza when Samuel was 18, leaving him to run the ranch alone with his younger sister, Emma. "He was just a boy himself," Martha said, shaking her head. "But he stepped up, worked himself half to death to keep this place going. Built it up to now runs about 500 head of cattle and has 10 men working for him. Good men, loyal. He treats them fair." "And his sister? You mentioned she moved to Colorado." "Emma married a banker from Denver 5 years ago. Good match, but Samuel misses her something fierce. She's expecting their first child come winter." Martha paused in her kneading. "What about your people, Bethany? Someone must be worried about you." Bethany's hand stilled over the peas. "I have no family left. My father died last year. He was a professor at the university in Philadelphia." She didn't mention her father's gambling debts, or the arrangement he'd made before his death with Harold Whitcomb, a shipping magnate of 60 years who had agreed to settle those debts in exchange for Bethany's hand in marriage. "I'm sorry for your loss," Martha said gently. "But surely there's someone." "No," Bethany replied firmly. "I was traveling to Shoshone City to take a position as the school teacher. The school board is expecting me, though I'm already late." Anxiety flickered through her at the thought. "I should write to them immediately, explain what happened." Martha nodded. "Samuel will help with that when he returns. In the meantime, you need to regain your strength." The day passed quietly, with Bethany helping as much as her recovering body would allow. She met several of the ranch hands when they came in for the midday meal, each man politely removing his hat and speaking in hushed tones, as if afraid of startling her. Their deference made her uncomfortable. She had never wanted to be treated as fragile or delicate, but she recognized the respect behind it. It was late afternoon when Samuel returned, the sound of hoofbeats announcing his arrival before he appeared at the kitchen door, removing his hat as he entered. His gaze immediately found Bethany, who was sitting at the table peeling potatoes. "Miss Evans," he said with a nod, "it's good to see you up and about." "Thanks to your kindness," she replied, suddenly self-conscious in the borrowed dress, "and Mrs. Fletcher's excellent care." Samuel hung his hat on a peg by the door and washed his hands at the pump sink before joining her at the table. Up close, in the clear light of day, Bethany could see him properly for the first time. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 28 or 30, with dark brown hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar. His face was tanned from long days in the sun, laugh lines crinkling at the corners of his gray eyes. A scar ran along his jawline, the only imperfection in his otherwise handsome features. "I spoke with Sheriff Taylor," he said, accepting a cup of coffee from Martha. "He's organizing a search party to look for other survivors and track the bandits. They've been hitting stages along that route for months now. We're there." "Did they find anyone else?" Bethany asked, dreading the answer but needing to know. Samuel's expression grew solemn. "2 bodies at the site, the driver and a male passenger. They're still looking for others." Bethany closed her eyes briefly, remembering the elderly couple who had sat across from her, the young man traveling to meet his fiancée, the businessman with his leather portfolio. "There were 6 passengers, including myself," she said quietly, "and the driver made 7. "The sheriff's men will find them," Samuel assured her, though they both knew what that likely meant. "I also spoke with the school board in town. They were relieved to hear you're alive. They'd begun to fear the worst when you didn't arrive as scheduled. The position, is it still mine?" Bethany asked anxiously. "It is. School doesn't start for another 3 weeks, so you have time to recover." He hesitated, then added, "I told them you'd be staying here until you're well enough to move into town." Bethany straightened, her pride prickling. "That's very generous, Mr. Garrett, but I wouldn't want to impose." "It's no imposition," he interrupted gently. "The doctor in town is away delivering a baby in the next county, and you shouldn't be moved until he can examine you properly. Besides, Martha enjoys having another woman to talk to." He glanced at the housekeeper with affection. "Don't you, Martha?" "Indeed I do," the older woman agreed, setting a plate of cookies on the table between them. "And you'll need proper clothes and necessities before you can start teaching." "Samuel brought your trunk from the stage office. They found it thrown clear of the robbery." "My trunk survived." Bethany couldn't hide her relief. Her teaching materials, a few precious books, and the modest savings she'd managed to hide from Harold Whitcomb's associates were in that trunk. Samuel nodded. "It's on the porch. I'll bring it in for you." The trunk, scratched but intact, contained everything Bethany had brought west: 3 dresses, undergarments, a nightgown, a shawl, her teaching certificate and letters of reference, several books, a journal, writing materials, and a small box containing her mother's locket and $50 in gold coins sewn into the lining of the box. It wasn't much to show for 23 years of life, but it was hers. That evening, dressed in her own clothes and feeling more herself, Bethany joined Samuel and Martha for dinner in the ranch house's dining room. The conversation flowed easily, with Samuel describing the latest developments in Shoshone City, a new mercantile opening, plans for a church building, rumors of the railroad possibly extending a line through the area. "That would change everything," Martha remarked, passing the bread. "Bring more settlers, more business. More trouble too," Samuel added. "But progress can't be stopped, and truthfully, we could use a faster way to get our cattle to market." Bethany listened, fascinated by the workings of this frontier community, so different from the established society she had left behind. In Philadelphia, her father's position at the university had placed them in academic circles, their lives revolving around lectures, scholarly debates, and the occasional cultural event. Here, life seemed to be measured in more practical terms: the weather, the health of livestock, the success of crops, the distances between settlements. "What will you teach the children of Shoshone City, Miss Evans?" Samuel asked, drawing her from her thoughts. "Reading, writing, arithmetic, of course," she replied. "But also history, geography, natural sciences. Knowledge is freedom, Mr. Garrett, and these children deserve as much freedom as we can give them." Something flickered in Samuel's eyes: respect, perhaps, or curiosity. "An admirable philosophy. Though I imagine some of the parents might prefer their children learn more practical skills. Reading a contract before signing it is practical. Understanding how to calculate interest on a loan is practical. Knowing the history of this country and its laws is practical." Bethany's voice grew passionate. "Education isn't a luxury, it's a necessity, especially here on the frontier." Samuel leaned back in his chair, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I believe Shoshone City has found exactly the right teacher," he said. "Though I hope you'll include some time for play in your curriculum. Children need that too." The conversation continued late into the evening, moving to the sitting room where a small fire warded off the night's chill. Bethany found herself speaking more openly than she had in years, sharing stories of her childhood, her father's work, her own education at a women's seminary in Boston. Samuel listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that revealed his own surprising breadth of knowledge. "My father believed in education," he explained when Bethany commented on this. "He had books shipped from back east, hired a tutor for Emma and me until we were old enough to attend the school in town. Said the future of the West depended on brains as much as brawn." "A wise man," Bethany said softly. "You must miss him." "Every day," Samuel admitted, his gaze moving to the portrait above the mantel, a stern-faced man with Samuel's gray eyes standing beside a petite woman with a gentle smile. Both of them. When Martha announced it was time for her to retire, Bethany realized how late it had grown. She rose, wincing slightly as her bruised body protested the movement. Samuel was immediately at her side, a hand under her elbow to steady her. "Thank you," she said, suddenly aware of his closeness, the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. "For everything." "You're welcome to stay as long as needed," he replied, his voice low. "Though I expect once you're settled in town, you'll have your pick of more suitable accommodations. Shoshone City has several respectable boarding houses for single ladies." There was something in his tone, a careful neutrality that hadn't been present earlier, that made Bethany wonder if he was eager to be rid of her. The thought brought an unexpected pang of disappointment. "Of course," she said, matching his formality. "I wouldn't want to overstay my welcome." Samuel's brow furrowed slightly. "That's not what I meant. I just—" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that betrayed his discomfort. "A single woman staying at a bachelor's ranch, even with Martha here as chaperone, might lead to talk. I wouldn't want your reputation compromised before you even begin your teaching position," understanding dawned. "You're concerned for my standing in the community. Frontier towns can be quick to judge, especially newcomers." He hesitated, then added, "especially women." Bethany couldn't help but smile at his consideration. "Mr. Garrett, I fled Philadelphia to escape judgment and constraints. I assure you, I'm quite capable of handling a few wagging tongues." The tension in Samuel's shoulders eased. "Then stay until you're fully recovered, please." That night, lying in bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the prairie, the distant howl of a coyote, the soft hooting of an owl, the whisper of wind through the grass, Bethany reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been on a stagecoach, heart pounding with equal parts fear and exhilaration as she fled from a future she couldn't accept. Now she was recovering in the home of a man who embodied everything she had imagined about the West: strength, honor, independence. But there was more to Samuel Garrett than those surface qualities. In the quiet moments, she had glimpsed a depth of feeling, an intelligence that belied the simple cowboy label. He was a man who read Shakespeare and discussed politics, who could gentle a wild horse and quote Thoreau with equal ease. A contradiction, much like the frontier itself, rugged yet vulnerable, dangerous yet filled with unexpected beauty. As sleep claimed her, Bethany wondered what other surprises Shoshone City and its most intriguing resident might hold for her. The days that followed established a gentle rhythm. Each morning, Bethany woke to the sounds of the ranch coming to life. She would dress and make her way to the kitchen, where Martha would have breakfast waiting. Sometimes Samuel joined them, sometimes his duties called him away before dawn. When he was present, the conversation flowed easily, covering everything from literature to local gossip. Bethany's strength returned gradually. At first, she could manage only small tasks around the house: setting the table, drying dishes, folding laundry. But as the bruises faded and the pain in her ribs subsided, she grew restless for more activity. "You're looking better," Samuel observed one morning, a week after her arrival. He had just come in from the barn, his shirt damp with sweat from early chores. "The color's back in your cheeks." "I feel better," Bethany replied, pouring him a cup of coffee. Martha had gone to visit her sister in a neighboring homestead, leaving Bethany to manage the household for the day. "Well enough to be useful, I think." Samuel accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. "You don't need to earn your keep, Miss Evans." "Bethany," she corrected him. "And it's not about earning my keep. It's about going mad from boredom." She smiled to soften her words. "I'm accustomed to activity, Mr. Garrett." "Samuel," he countered, returning her smile, "and if it's activity you want, I'm riding out to check on the south pasture today. You could come along if you feel up to it." The invitation surprised her. "On horseback?" "Unless you prefer walking 10 miles, he teased. "I have a gentle mare that would suit you." Bethany hesitated only briefly. In Philadelphia, ladies rode side saddle in parks, their movements constrained by corsets and propriety. But this was Wyoming Territory, where practicality outweighed convention. "I'd like that," she decided. "Though I should warn you, my riding experience is limited." "We'll take it slow," Samuel promised. An hour later, dressed in one of Emma's old riding skirts that Martha had hastily altered, Bethany stood beside a chestnut mare with a white blaze down her face. "This is Daisy," Samuel explained, adjusting the stirrups. "She's steady as they come." Bethany stroked the horse's velvet nose, receiving a gentle nudge in return. "She's beautiful. She seems to approve of you, too." Samuel's hands were warm and strong as he helped Bethany mount, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary once she was settled in the saddle. He cleared his throat and stepped back. "Comfortable?" Bethany adjusted her position, finding her balance. The sensation of sitting astride was strange but not unpleasant. "Yes, I think so." Samuel mounted Thunder with practiced ease, and they set off at a walk, following a well-worn trail that led away from the ranch buildings toward a line of distant hills. The morning was perfect clear blue sky, the air crisp with a hint of autumn, though it was only late August. "How did you come to own such a large ranch at your age?" Bethany asked as they rode side by side, curiosity getting the better of her. Samuel's expression grew reflective. "My father started with 50 acres and 20 head of cattle, back when this territory was still considered Indian land. He was always fair in his dealings with the Shoshone people, hence the name of the town. When other ranchers had trouble, we were mostly left in peace." He adjusted his hat against the sun. "When my parents died, I had a choice: sell the ranch and move back east, or build on what they'd started. I couldn't bear to let it go." "It's a magnificent legacy," Bethany observed, taking in the vast expanse of grassland dotted with grazing cattle. "You should be proud." "Most days I am." There was something in his voice, a note of weariness perhaps, or loneliness, that made Bethany glance at him sharply. But a ranch this size was meant for a family. Sometimes it feels empty. The admission hung between them, unexpectedly personal. Bethany understood emptiness all too well, the hollow feeling of a house without laughter, a life without shared joy. After her mother's death when Bethany was 12, her father had retreated into his work, leaving her to navigate adolescence largely alone. Even surrounded by students and colleagues, Professor Evans had been isolated in his grief, and his daughter had learned to be self-sufficient out of necessity. "I understand," she said softly. "After my mother died, my father and I lived together but separately, if that makes sense. Two people occupying the same space but rarely connecting." Samuel nodded. "That's how it was for Emma and me for a while after our parents died. too busy surviving to really talk, to grieve together. By the time I realized what was happening, she'd met James and was planning her life in Denver. "Do you resent her for leaving?" Bethany asked carefully. "No," Samuel replied without hesitation. "She deserved happiness, a life of her own choosing. I just wish." He trailed off, then shook his head. "It doesn't matter. We're here to enjoy the day, not dwell on what can't be changed." They rode in companionable silence for a time, cresting a small rise that offered a panoramic view of the surrounding countryside. In the distance, Bethany could make out what appeared to be a small settlement, perhaps Shoshone City itself. "Is that the town?" she asked, pointing. Samuel followed her gaze. "Yes, that's it. Not much to look at compared to Philadelphia, I imagine." "It's perfect," Bethany said with unexpected certainty. After the confinement of eastern cities, the openness of this landscape felt like freedom. "Will we ride there today?" "Not today," Samuel replied, turning his horse toward a grove of trees that marked a creek bed. "But I'll take you in to meet the school board before the week is out. They're anxious to meet their new teacher." They stopped at the creek to water the horses and rest. Samuel spread a blanket beneath a cottonwood tree and produced a simple picnic from his saddlebags: bread, cheese, dried apples, and a jar of Martha's pickled vegetables. As they ate, he pointed out various landmarks and shared stories of the land and its history. Bethany listened, entranced not just by the tales but by the man telling them, his face animated with obvious love for this wild country. "You make it sound magical," she commented, leaning back against the tree trunk. "Even the hardships." Samuel smiled, a strand of dark hair falling across his forehead as he tilted his head. "It is, in its way. Unforgiving but honest. The land doesn't lie or pretend. It demands your best and punishes carelessness, but it also rewards those who respect it." He glanced at her, a hint of self-consciousness crossing his features. "I sound like a romantic fool, don't I?" "No," Bethany replied truthfully. "You sound like someone who has found their place in the world." She hesitated, then added, "I envy that certainty. What made you leave Philadelphia?" Samuel asked, his gaze steady on her face. "If you don't mind my asking." Bethany had been expecting the question but still found herself hesitating. The truth was complicated, layered with her father's failures and her own desperate bid for freedom. Yet looking at Samuel's open expression, she felt a sudden desire to be honest, to share the burden she had carried alone. "My father was a brilliant man," she began, "but not a practical one. After my mother died, he sought comfort in gambling halls rather than at home. By the time he died last year, he had accumulated substantial debts." She twisted her hands in her lap. "He had arranged for those debts to be settled by a business associate named Harold Whitcomb in exchange for my hand in marriage." Samuel's expression darkened. "Without your consent?" "He believed he was securing my future," Bethany said, trying even now to be fair to her father's memory. "Mr. Whitcomb is wealthy, established in society. He's also 60 years old, has buried 2 wives already, and has a reputation for controlling behavior." "So you ran," Samuel concluded, no judgment in his voice. Bethany nodded. "I had my teaching certificate, good references. When I saw the advertisement for a position in Wyoming Territory, it seemed like Providence far enough away that Mr. Whitcomb couldn't easily follow." "Brave," Samuel said quietly, "leaving everything you knew for uncertainty." "Or desperate," Bethany countered with a wry smile. "Either way, I don't regret it, even with the stagecoach robbery." Samuel was silent for a moment, his gaze moving to the distant horizon. "I'm glad you came west," he finally said, looking back at her with an intensity that made her heart quicken. "Despite the circumstances of our meeting." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of connection beyond mere coincidence or convenience. Bethany felt it like a physical thing, a tightening in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. The ride back to the ranch was quieter, both lost in their own thoughts. By the time they reached the stables, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the yard. Bethany's body ached from the unaccustomed activity, but it was a pleasant sort of pain, the kind that promised strength to come. Samuel helped her dismount, his hands at her waist, steadying her as her feet touched the ground. "Thank you," she said, looking up at him, suddenly aware of how close they stood. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Samuel stepped back, releasing her. "You're a natural rider," he said, his voice slightly rough. "A few more outings and you'll be racing the wind." Martha was waiting when they returned to the house, her expression a mixture of relief and exasperation. "I was beginning to worry," she scolded lightly. "And you, Miss Evans, riding out like that when you're barely recovered. What were you thinking?" "That I would go mad if I spent another day indoors," Bethany replied honestly. "But you're right, I may have overestimated my strength." She winced as she removed her borrowed hat, a dull headache beginning to pulse behind her eyes. Martha's expression softened. "A hot bath will help with the soreness. I'll have one of the boys bring up water." The bath did indeed work wonders, easing the ache in Bethany's muscles and washing away the dust of the trail. Afterward, dressed in a clean blue calico, she made her way downstairs to find Samuel standing by the fireplace, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt, his damp hair combed back from his forehead. "You look rested," he observed, his gaze appreciative but respectful. "As do you," she replied, noting how the clean-shaven jaw revealed the strong line of his face, making him appear younger and somehow more vulnerable. "Though I'm afraid I may have difficulty walking tomorrow after today's adventure." Samuel smiled. "It gets easier. The first ride is always the hardest." Dinner that evening was a lively affair, with Martha insisting on hearing every detail of their outing while serving a hearty meal of venison stew and freshly baked bread. Samuel spoke of the cattle they had checked, the condition of the grazing land, his plans for the fall roundup and drive to the railroad station 60 miles away. "Will you go with the herd?" Bethany asked, surprising herself with the pang of dismay she felt at the thought of his absence. "For part of the way," Samuel replied. "I have good men who can see it through to the end. My place is here, especially with winter coming on." The evening passed pleasantly, with Samuel reading aloud from a volume of Tennyson's poems while Martha mended, and Bethany worked on lesson plans for her upcoming classes. It felt strangely domestic, as if they were a family rather than a convalescent schoolteacher and her temporary hosts. The realization brought both comfort and unease to Bethany. Comfort in the sense of belonging, unease in knowing it was temporary. 3 days later, true to his word, Samuel took Bethany into Shoshone City to meet the school board. The town was smaller than she had imagined, a single main street lined with wooden buildings, a church with a modest steeple, a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and assorted businesses catering to the needs of the surrounding ranches and farms. The school itself stood at the edge of town, a simple one-room structure painted white, with windows on both sides to catch the light and a small bell tower on the roof. Beside it stood a neat cottage, the teacher's residence, Samuel explained. "It's not fancy," he said as he helped her down from the wagon, "but it's sound. The last teacher, Miss Wilson, lived there for 5 years before she married the blacksmith." Bethany looked at the cottage with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. This would be her home, her first truly independent dwelling. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it. The school board consisted of 3 men: Mr. Hollister, the owner of the general store, Reverend Thomas from the church, and Judge Wilson, who served as the town's justice of the peace and legal authority. They met in the back room of the general store, where Mr. Hollister's wife served coffee and cake, while the men questioned Bethany about her qualifications and teaching philosophy. "We have 32 children of school age in and around Shoshone City," Judge Wilson explained, consulting his notes. "Ages 6 to 16, various levels of education. Some have never had formal schooling. Several of our families are homesteaders," Reverend Thomas added. "They value education, but need their children's help at harvest time and spring planting." Bethany nodded, understanding the competing demands of frontier life. "I can be flexible with attendance during those critical periods, perhaps offer additional lessons in the evenings or on weekends to help students catch up." The men exchanged approving glances. Mr. Hollister leaned forward, his expression serious. "Miss Evans, we should discuss your situation." Mr. Garrett explained about the stagecoach robbery, and of course you have our deepest sympathies. But there's been some talk in town about a single young woman living at the Diamond G. Bethany felt heat rise to her cheeks, not embarrassment but indignation. "Mr. Garrett rescued me when I was near death and has shown nothing but proper consideration during my recovery. Mrs. Fletcher has been present as chaperone at all times." Her voice was steady, her gaze direct. "If anyone in town questions my character based on these circumstances, they are welcome to discuss their concerns with me directly." There was a moment of startled silence, then Judge Wilson let out a bark of laughter. "I believe we've found our teacher, gentlemen." He turned to Samuel, who had remained silent during the interview. "Mr. Garrett, you were right about Miss Evans. She has exactly the spirit this town needs." The meeting concluded with the board offering Bethany the position, which she formally accepted. School would begin in 2 weeks, giving her time to move into the cottage and prepare the classroom. Her salary would be $40 per month, with the cottage provided free of charge and fuel for the winter supplied by the community. As they left the store, Samuel couldn't hide his smile. "You impressed them," he said, "especially with that speech about your character." "I spoke only the truth," Bethany replied, but she returned his smile, feeling lighter than she had in months. The position was hers, the future beginning to take shape. They spent the remainder of the day in town, visiting the various businesses so Samuel could introduce Bethany to the community. At the mercantile, they selected furnishings for the cottage: a bed frame, a comfortable chair, dishes and cooking utensils, fabric for curtains. Samuel insisted on paying for these items as a welcome to Shoshone City gift, overriding Bethany's protests. "Consider it an investment in the town's future," he said firmly. "A good teacher needs a proper home." At the dressmaker's shop, Bethany ordered 2 new dresses suitable for teaching, using some of her carefully hoarded savings. Mrs. Peterson, the dressmaker, promised to have them ready within the week and offered to alter any existing garments to better fit Bethany's slender frame. By the time they started back to the ranch, the sun was low in the sky, casting golden light across the rolling landscape. Bethany found herself studying Samuel's profile as he drove the wagon, noting the quiet strength in his hands as he handled the reins, the way the evening light caught in his hair. "Thank you," she said suddenly, "for everything you've done." Samuel glanced at her, his expression softening. "You don't need to thank me, Bethany." "I do," she insisted. "You saved my life, gave me shelter, helped me secure my position. I don't know how I'll ever repay such kindness." "Teach our children well," he replied simply. "That's repayment enough." But was it? As the wagon rolled toward the Diamond G, Bethany wondered what would happen when she moved to town, when the daily interactions that had become so important to her came to an end. Would Samuel visit? Would their paths cross in town? Or would their brief connection fade as they returned to their separate lives? The thought brought an unexpected ache, a sense of loss for something not yet gone. In the short time she had known him, Samuel Garrett had become important to her in ways she wasn't yet ready to examine too closely. The days leading up to Bethany's move to town passed too quickly. Martha helped her alter Emma's old riding skirt and showed her how to make simple curtains for the cottage. Samuel arranged for the furniture they had purchased to be delivered, and spent an evening building bookshelves for her small collection of volumes and teaching materials. On her last night at the ranch, Martha prepared a special dinner roast beef with all the trimmings, followed by apple pie still warm from the oven. They ate in the dining room by candlelight, the atmosphere both celebratory and tinged with melancholy. "You must come back and visit," Martha insisted as she served the pie. "Sunday dinners at least. The house will seem too quiet without you." "I'd like that," Bethany said, touched by the invitation. She looked to Samuel, seated at the head of the table, if it wouldn't be an imposition. "Never," he replied, his gaze holding hers. "You're always welcome here." Later, after Martha had retired, Bethany found herself alone with Samuel on the front porch. The night was clear, a canopy of stars stretching across the vast sky, the air carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "Nervous about tomorrow?" Samuel asked, leaning against the porch railing beside her. "A little," she admitted. "It's the first time I'll truly be on my own." "You won't be alone," he said quietly. "Not really. Shoshone City is small, but it's a community. People look out for each other here." "Is that why you stayed?" Bethany asked. "After your parents died, I mean, for the community?" Samuel considered the question. "Partly, but mostly for this." He gestured toward the darkened landscape, the silhouettes of distant mountains against the star-filled sky. "This land gets into your blood, becomes part of you. I couldn't imagine being anywhere else." "I think I understand," Bethany said softly. "Even in the short time I've been here, I've felt it too, this sense of belonging. It's strange. I've spent my whole life in cities, yet I feel more at home here than I ever did in Philadelphia." Samuel turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "I'm glad you feel that way. I want you to be happy here, Bethany." The sincerity in his voice, the intensity of his gaze made her heart beat faster. "I think I will be," she replied. "Thanks in no small part to you." Samuel took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cool night air. "May I call on you? In town?" The question, so formal yet filled with meaning, brought a flush to Bethany's cheeks. "I'd like that very much," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment she thought he might kiss her. His gaze dropped to her lips, his head inclining slightly toward hers. But then he straightened, a rueful smile touching his mouth. "It's getting late," he said, "and tomorrow will be a busy day." Bethany nodded, both disappointed and relieved. Whatever was growing between them deserved time, deserved to unfold properly. "Good night, Samuel," she said, turning toward the door. "Bethany," he called softly as she reached for the handle. When she looked back, he was watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Sweet dreams." Those two simple words followed her into sleep that night, wrapping around her like a promise. The teacher's cottage, when Bethany moved in the next day, was better than she had dared hope. Someone, likely the women of the town, had cleaned it thoroughly, hung fresh curtains at the windows, placed a vase of wildflowers on the small dining table. The furniture Samuel had purchased fit perfectly in the compact spaces. A bed with a patchwork quilt, a rocking chair by the fireplace, a desk beneath the window overlooking a small garden plot. Samuel helped carry in her trunk and the few additional items she had acquired during her stay at the Diamond G. Martha had insisted she take one of the quilts, to remember us by, and had packed a basket of preserves, bread, and baked goods to see her through her first days. "It's not much," Bethany said, looking around the two-room cottage with its simple furnishings. "But it's mine." "It suits you," Samuel replied, setting down the last box. Simple but with hidden depths. The compliment, unexpected and perceptive, brought warmth to Bethany's cheeks. Before she could respond, there was a knock at the door, the first of many visitors that afternoon. The women of Shoshone City arrived in a steady stream, bearing welcome gifts. Mrs. Hollister with a set of hand-embroidered tea towels, Mrs. Peterson with curtains for the bedroom window, Reverend Thomas's wife with a Bible for the classroom, and numerous others with preserves, baked goods, and practical items for the household. Each visitor also brought thinly veiled curiosity about the new teacher and her connection to Samuel Garrett. Bethany answered their questions honestly but with discretion, sharing the story of the stagecoach robbery and her rescue without embellishment. By the time the last visitor departed, the sun was setting, and Bethany was exhausted but content. Samuel had left hours earlier, called away by ranch business but promising to return the following Sunday to escort her to church. "So you can meet the rest of the community." Alone in her cottage for the first time, Bethany lit the lamps against the gathering darkness and prepared a simple supper from the bounty her visitors had provided. As she ate at her small table, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this place. The desperate flight from Philadelphia, the terrifying robbery, the days of pain and recovery, and now this a fresh start, a community willing to welcome her, and perhaps, just perhaps, the beginnings of something she had never expected to find on the frontier. Later, preparing for bed, Bethany stood by the window looking out at the star-filled sky. The same stars that shone over the Diamond G, she thought, the same stars that Samuel might be looking at in this very moment. The idea created a connection despite the miles between them, a shared experience that transcended separation. She slept deeply that night, dreamless and content in her new home. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity as Bethany prepared for the start of school. She cleaned and organized the classroom, inventoried the available books and supplies, developed lessons appropriate for different age groups and ability levels. In the evenings, she met with parents who came to introduce themselves and their children, listening to their hopes and concerns, building relationships that would form the foundation of her work. True to his word, Samuel arrived on Sunday morning to escort her to church. He appeared at her door looking remarkably different from the working rancher she had come to know, clean-shaven, hair neatly combed, wearing a dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and narrow waist. The sight of him standing on her small porch, hat in hand, made Bethany's heart flutter embarrassingly. "You look lovely," he said, his appreciation evident as he took in her appearance one of her new dresses, dark blue with white collar and cuffs, her hair arranged in a simple but elegant style. "Thank you," she replied, feeling suddenly shy. "You're quite handsome yourself." The church service provided Bethany with an opportunity to meet the remainder of Shoshone City's residents. She sat beside Samuel in the third pew, conscious of the curious glances directed their way, the whispered comments behind raised hymnals. If Samuel noticed, he gave no sign, his attention focused on Reverend Thomas's sermon about community and fellowship. After the service, there was a community luncheon on the church grounds, with families spreading blankets on the grass, sharing food and conversation. Samuel remained by Bethany's side, introducing her to those she hadn't yet met, his hand occasionally at the small of her back as they moved through the crowd, a gesture both protective and possessive that did not go unnoticed. "People are talking," Bethany murmured as they accepted plates of food from Mrs. Hollister's table. Samuel's expression remained unconcerned. "People always talk. Does it bother you?" She considered the question honestly. In Philadelphia, such attention would have mortified her, bound as she was by the strict social codes of Eastern society. But here, in this new place where she was crafting a new life, the gossip seemed less important. "No," she realized with some surprise. "It doesn't." His smile was worth whatever rumors might circulate. Good. They ate with Judge Wilson and his wife, the conversation centering on the upcoming school term and Bethany's plans for the curriculum. The judge, a well-educated man who had practiced law in Chicago before coming west, offered to speak to the older students about the legal system and the importance of civic responsibility. "An excellent idea," Bethany agreed enthusiastically. "I believe education should extend beyond the classroom walls whenever possible." Mrs. Wilson, a plump, cheerful woman with graying hair, gave Samuel a knowing look. "Mr. Garrett, perhaps you could speak to the children about ranching. Many of them will follow in their parents' footsteps after all." "I'd be happy to," Samuel replied, glancing at Bethany, "if Miss Evans approves." "Of course," Bethany said quickly. "The children would benefit greatly from your knowledge." The exchange was innocent enough, but there was an undercurrent and assumption of future connection, of shared purpose that left Bethany both flustered and pleased. When Samuel walked her home after the luncheon, their conversation turned to more personal matters. "Will you come to dinner at the ranch next Sunday?" he asked as they reached her cottage. "Martha insists, and to be honest, I'd like it too." Bethany smiled, touched by the invitation. "I'd love to, but how will I get there? It's a long walk." "I'll come for you," Samuel replied immediately. "Or," he hesitated, then continued, "if you'd like your independence, you could borrow Daisy. She's yours whenever you need her." The offer, generous and thoughtful, spoke volumes about his understanding of her character. "Thank you," Bethany said softly, "for understanding that I need both connection and independence." Samuel's gaze held hers, something unspoken passing between them. "We all do," he said. "The trick is finding the right balance." He left her at her door with a tip of his hat and a promise to see her during the week, to check how you're settling in. Bethany watched him walk away, the tall figure cutting a distinctive silhouette against the afternoon sun, and felt a tug of emotion that went beyond simple attraction or gratitude. School began the following day with 30 children filling the wooden benches of the one-room schoolhouse. They ranged from shy 6-year-olds clutching new slates to lanky teenagers trying to appear disinterested. Bethany greeted each by name, having memorized them from her meetings with parents, and set about the task of assessing their knowledge levels. By day's end, she had divided the students into groups based on ability rather than age, assigned reading and arithmetic problems appropriate to each level, and begun to identify those who would need extra attention. She returned to her cottage exhausted but exhilarated, her mind already planning the next day's lessons. The week passed in a similar fashion, each day bringing new challenges and small victories. A 7-year-old mastering his letters, a reluctant 13-year-old boy discovering a passion for geography, a shy girl of 12 finding her voice during history discussions. Bethany threw herself into teaching with all the energy and dedication she possessed, returning home each evening tired but fulfilled. Samuel visited twice that week, once bringing a load of firewood for her cottage, in preparation for the coming winter, and once simply to invite her to ride with him on Saturday afternoon. "If you're not too busy with school preparations," he added, clearly giving her space to refuse. "I'd love to," Bethany replied without hesitation. The prospect of a few hours away from lesson plans and grading, spent in Samuel's company, was too tempting to resist. Saturday dawned clear and cool, a perfect day for riding. Samuel arrived mid-morning with Daisy and Thunder, finding Bethany already dressed in Emma's altered riding skirt and a simple shirtwaist. "Ready for an adventure?" he asked, his smile warming his gray eyes. "Always," she replied, returning his smile as he helped her mount. They rode north from town, following the course of a small creek that wound through stands of cottonwoods and willow. Samuel pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the area's history, both the recent settlement by white pioneers and the longer presence of the Shoshone people, who had given the town its name. "My father made peace with Chief Washakie when other ranchers were calling for the army to drive the Indians further west," Samuel explained as they rested in the shade of a massive cottonwood. "He believed there was room for all if men would act with honor toward each other." "A progressive view for the time," Bethany observed, impressed. Samuel nodded, his expression thoughtful. He wasn't always an easy man to live with, had high expectations, demanded much from himself and others. But in this, he was right. "The treaties made with the Shoshone have mostly been kept, at least in this part of the territory, and both sides have benefited." They ate a picnic lunch by the creek, cold chicken, bread, cheese, and apples while discussing Bethany's first week of teaching. Samuel listened attentively as she described her students, offering insights about their families and backgrounds that helped her better understand their needs. "You know everyone so well," she remarked, impressed by his detailed knowledge of the community. "It's a small town," he replied with a shrug, "and I've been here all my life. You'll know them just as well in time." In time. The phrase suggested permanence, a future in Shoshone City that Bethany had hardly dared contemplate. She had come west fleeing a future she couldn't accept, but had she found one she could embrace? Looking at Samuel across the picnic blanket, his face animated as he told a story about one of her students' older brothers, Bethany felt a surge of certainty. Yes, she could build a life here in this wild, beautiful place, among these straightforward people who valued hard work and honesty above social pretensions. The realization must have shown in her face, for Samuel paused mid-sentence. "What is it?" he asked, his head tilting slightly in curiosity. "I was just thinking how glad I am that I came west," Bethany replied honestly. "Even with everything that happened on the journey." Samuel's expression softened. "I'm glad too," he said simply. "More than I can say." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Then Samuel cleared his throat and began gathering the remains of their picnic. "We should head back if we want to reach town before dark." The ride back was companionable, with easy conversation about books they had both read, mutual acquaintances in Shoshone City, and plans for the coming Harvest Festival in October. As they approached town, however, Bethany noticed a change in Samuel's demeanor, a tension that hadn't been present earlier. "Is something wrong?" she asked as they slowed to a walk along the main street. Samuel hesitated, then said, "People are watching, talking. I don't want to cause problems for you, especially so early in your time here." Bethany glanced around, noting the curious faces in shop windows, the open stares from pedestrians. "Let them talk," she said with more confidence than she felt. "We've done nothing wrong." "No," Samuel agreed, "but reputations are fragile things, especially for women in frontier towns." He looked at her directly. "I care about you, Bethany. I don't want to make your life here more difficult." The simple declaration, "I care about you," made her heart skip. "I care about you too," she replied softly. "And if people choose to disapprove of that, it's their loss, not mine." A slow smile spread across Samuel's face, transforming his serious expression. "You're quite remarkable, do you know that?" Bethany felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Not remarkable. Just determined to live honestly." They parted at her cottage with the promise to see each other the following day for dinner at the ranch. As Samuel rode away, Bethany stood on her small porch, watching until he disappeared from sight. Only then did she notice Mrs. Peterson across the street, observing from her shop window with undisguised interest. Bethany raised a hand in greeting, refusing to act as if she had anything to hide. After a moment's hesitation, the dressmaker returned the gesture, then disappeared back into her shop. A small victory, perhaps, but Bethany sensed it was an important one. Sunday dinner at the Diamond G became a weekly tradition over the following month. Samuel would arrive at Bethany's cottage after church, sometimes with Thunder saddled and ready for a ride before dinner, sometimes with the wagon if the weather threatened. Martha always welcomed Bethany as if she had been gone for months rather than a week, fussing over her, insisting she looked too thin, preparing elaborate meals that left them all comfortably satisfied. During the week, Samuel found reasons to visit town supplies to purchase, business with the blacksmith or the general store, meetings with Judge Wilson about water rights or property boundaries. He always made time to stop by the schoolhouse or Bethany's cottage, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy. Wildflowers gathered along the trail, once a kitten from a litter born in the ranch barn to keep you company in that cottage. Bethany named the kitten Scholar and delighted in his playful antics, but her true joy came from the growing closeness between herself and Samuel. Each visit, each conversation, each shared experience deepened their connection, building a foundation of mutual respect and understanding that went beyond the initial attraction. By mid-October, with the harvest festival approaching and the first snow of winter threatening in the mountains, Bethany realized she had fallen deeply, irrevocably in love with Samuel Garrett. The knowledge frightened and exhilarated her in equal measure. She had come west seeking independence, freedom from the constraints of Eastern society and the marriage her father had arranged. Had she simply traded one form of dependence for another? No, she decided after careful reflection. What she felt for Samuel was not the gilded cage Harold Whitcomb had offered. Samuel respected her mind, valued her independence, encouraged her work. He saw her not as an ornament or a possession, but as a partner, an equal despite the different paths their lives had taken. The Harvest Festival, held in the town square on a crisp October Saturday, provided the perfect opportunity for the community to come together before winter isolated the outlying farms and ranches. There were contests of skill and strength for the men, baking and sewing competitions for the women, games for the children, and a dance in the evening at the newly completed community hall. Bethany spent the day moving between her students' activities, cheering their achievements, comforting the occasional tears of disappointment, and fielding questions from parents about their children's progress. Samuel, busy with the organization of the livestock competitions, caught her eye across the square whenever their paths crossed, his smile sending a warm thrill through her despite the cool air. As evening approached, Bethany returned to her cottage to change for the dance. She had saved one of her Philadelphia dresses for the occasion, a deep green silk with modest lace trim that complemented her auburn hair and fair complexion. Looking in the small mirror above her washstand, she allowed herself a moment of vanity, hoping Samuel would approve of her appearance. He arrived precisely at 7, dressed in his Sunday best, his dark hair still damp from washing. The appreciation in his eyes as he took in her appearance was all Bethany could have hoped for. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. "Every man at the dance will envy me." Bethany smiled, taking his arm. "And every woman will envy me," she replied. "You're quite handsome yourself, Mr. Garrett." The community hall, decorated with autumn leaves and harvest bounty, was already crowded when they arrived. A small band consisting of a fiddle, banjo, and piano provided lively music, and couples were already dancing a spirited Virginia reel. Samuel led Bethany to a group that included Judge Wilson and his wife, Reverend Thomas and his family, and several other prominent citizens. The conversation flowed easily, touching on the day's events, the success of the harvest, concerns about the coming winter, and plans for the town's development. Bethany, now nearly 2 months into her position, felt fully a part of the community, her opinions sought and respected. When Samuel asked her to dance, leading her to the center of the floor for a waltz, Bethany was acutely aware of the eyes following them. But as he took her in his arms, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers, the rest of the room seemed to fade away. They moved together with a natural grace that belied their limited practice, as if their bodies had always known each other's rhythms. "Everyone is watching," Bethany murmured, though she found she didn't care. "Let them," Samuel replied, echoing her earlier sentiment. His eyes, fixed on hers, conveyed more than his words. "I want them to see." The implication was clear. He wanted the community to understand that his intentions toward Bethany were serious, honorable. The realization sent a flutter of anticipation through her. They had been moving toward this moment since that first day when she had been too weak to stand, and he had offered his strength to lean on. As the evening progressed, they danced several more times, but also socialized with others, maintaining the proprieties expected of them. When Samuel was called away to help settle a dispute between 2 farmers, Bethany found herself in conversation with Mrs. Wilson, the judge's astute wife. "He loves you, you know," the older woman said without preamble, nodding toward Samuel across the room. "I've known that boy since he was knee-high to a grasshopper, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Bethany felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mrs. Wilson, oh, don't be embarrassed, my dear. It's a fine thing, love, especially when it's returned." Mrs. Wilson's knowing look made it clear she had observed Bethany's feelings as well. "This town needs more families, more children, more future. You two would make beautiful babies." Before Bethany could formulate a response to this frank assessment, Samuel returned, offering his arm. "May I steal Miss Evans for another dance?" he asked Mrs. Wilson. "You may indeed," the older woman replied with a twinkle in her eye. "Just remember what I said, both of you." As Samuel led her back to the dance floor, Bethany couldn't help but laugh softly. "What did she say to you?" he asked, curious. "Nothing that bears repeating in public," Bethany replied, still smiling, "but she seems to approve of our friendship." Samuel's expression grew serious as he took her in his arms for another waltz. "Is that what this is, friendship?" The direct question, asked with such vulnerability, demanded an equally direct answer. "No," Bethany said softly. "It's much more than that, at least for me." Relief and joy transformed his features. "For me as well," he admitted. "Much more." They danced in silence after that, no more words needed in the moment. But as the music ended, Samuel leaned close to her ear. "Walk with me." Outside, Bethany nodded, her heart beating rapidly as they made their excuses to their friends and slipped out of the crowded hall. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant in the black sky, a crescent moon providing just enough light to see by. Samuel led her to a bench beneath an old oak tree in the town square, far enough from the hall for privacy, but still within sight for propriety's sake. For a long moment they sat in silence, their breath forming small clouds in the chilly air. Then Samuel took her hands in his touch warm despite the cold. "Bethany," he began, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of emotion. "I know you came west seeking independence, a life on your own terms. I respect that, admire it even. But these past weeks, getting to know you, spending time with you, I find myself hoping your plans might include me." Bethany's heart soared at his words, but she forced herself to speak carefully. "In what way, Samuel?" He met her gaze directly, his gray eyes reflecting the moonlight. "In every way. As my wife, my partner, the mother of my children. I love you, Bethany Evans. I think I have since that first day when you tried so hard to stand on your own even though you were hurt and afraid." The declaration, so heartfelt and direct, brought tears to Bethany's eyes. "Samuel, you don't need to answer now," he hurried to add. "I know it's soon. We've known each other barely 2 months. I wanted you to know where I stand, what I hope for." Bethany squeezed his hands, her tears spilling over. "I don't need time," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I love you too. I've been falling in love with you since you said then lean on me till you can walk again. You offered your strength without trying to take my independence, and that's when I knew you were different from any man I'd ever met." Samuel's face lit with joy, and he raised one hand to gently brush away her tears. "Is that a yes?" he asked, a touch of wonder in his voice. "It's a yes," Bethany confirmed, smiling through her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you, Samuel Garrett." He kissed her then, beneath the stars and the oak tree, a kiss that began gently but deepened with the release of long restrained emotion. Bethany responded with equal fervor, her arms winding around his neck, her body leaning into his as naturally as she had that first day when she'd been too weak to stand. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I was prepared to court you properly for months," he admitted with a soft laugh. "Had a whole plan worked out." "You can still court me," Bethany replied, her fingers stroking the hair at the nape of his neck. "All the way to the altar." "And when will that be?" Samuel asked, pulling back to look at her, his hands warm at her waist. Bethany considered the question. The school term would end in December for the winter break. "After Christmas," she suggested. "That would give us time to prepare, and the weather should still allow travel for anyone who needs to come from a distance." She paused, suddenly uncertain. "Unless that's too soon." Samuel's smile was answer enough. "If it were up to me, we'd ride to the judge's house tonight," he confessed. "But I suppose we should do things properly, for the sake of your position in the community if nothing else." "After Christmas, then," Bethany agreed, her heart so full it felt it might burst. "Though I have one condition." Samuel raised an eyebrow, waiting. "I want to continue teaching, at least until we have children," she said, watching his reaction carefully. "It's important to me." His response was immediate and untroubled. "Of course. I'd never ask you to give up something that matters to you." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. "I want a partner, Bethany, not a possession." They sealed this understanding with another kiss, slower and deeper than the first, full of promise for their shared future. It was only the sound of the hall doors opening, spilling light and music and voices into the night, that brought them back to their surroundings. "We should go back inside," Bethany said reluctantly. "Before we're missed." Samuel stood, offering his hand to help her up. "One more dance," he suggested. "And then I'll take you home." They returned to the hall hand in hand, their radiant expressions immediately noticed by those near the door. "Mrs. Wilson caught Bethany's eye and gave a knowing nod, while Judge Wilson clapped Samuel on the shoulder as they passed. No words necessary. News of their engagement spread through the community with the speed of a prairie fire. By the time Samuel escorted Bethany home that night, at least a dozen people had offered congratulations. Women had begun discussing wedding preparations, and Reverend Thomas had penciled the date in his calendar. At Bethany's cottage, they lingered on the porch, reluctant to part despite the late hour and the cold. "Will you tell your students?" Samuel asked, his arms around her waist, her back against the door. "On Monday," Bethany replied, her hands resting on his chest. "Though I suspect most will have heard from their parents by then. And you'll come to dinner tomorrow." Martha will be beside herself with joy. Bethany smiled at the thought of the housekeeper's reaction. "Of course. I can't wait to see her face when you tell her." Samuel's expression grew serious, his eyes searching hers. "Are you sure, Bethany, about all of this? I don't want you to feel rushed," or she silenced him with a finger to his lips. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," she said firmly. "I came west seeking a new beginning, but I never dreamed I would find a love like this. You are everything I never knew I needed." Samuel Garrett. His kiss was answer enough, tender yet passionate, a promise of all that was to come. When they finally parted, breathless and flushed despite the cold, Samuel rested his forehead against hers once more. "I'll see you tomorrow," he said, his voice husky. "Dream of me." "Always," Bethany replied, and knew it for truth. The weeks leading up to Christmas passed in a blur of activity. Bethany continued teaching, incorporating holiday themes into her lessons, and preparing for the school's Christmas pageant. In the evenings and on weekends, she worked with Martha and the women of Shoshone City on wedding preparations, a dress made from cream-colored satin ordered from Denver, flowers arranged to be brought by train from Cheyenne, food and music planned for the reception to be held in the community hall. Samuel, meanwhile, added a second bedroom to the teacher's cottage and began construction on a proper house halfway between town and the ranch, so you can be close to the school but still part of ranch life. His thoughtfulness in this, as in all things, only deepened Bethany's love for him. Their courtship, though brief by Eastern standards, was thorough in getting to know each other. Long rides across the Diamond G, quiet evenings reading by the fire, discussions about everything from philosophy to cattle breeding to child rearing. They discovered shared values, compatible dreams, and enough differences to keep life interesting. "What will we name our children?" Samuel asked one Sunday afternoon as they sat by the creek where they had shared their first picnic, now frozen over with winter ice. Bethany, wrapped in a heavy blanket against the cold, leaned into his side. "I've always liked the name Daniel for a boy," she mused, "after my grandfather, and for a girl perhaps Elizabeth after my mother." "Daniel and Elizabeth Garrett," Samuel said, testing the names. "I like them. Though perhaps Elizabeth is a bit formal for a frontier child." "Beth, then," Bethany suggested. "Or Betsy." "Beth," Samuel decided. "It suits the daughter of a schoolteacher and a rancher, simple but elegant." Bethany looked up at him, love swelling in her heart. "You've thought about this?" "I've thought about all of it," he admitted. "Our life together, our family, growing old side by side. From that first moment when you leaned on me, I've been imagining our future." On Christmas Eve, the community gathered at the church for a service of carols and readings, followed by the school pageant in which every child had a part to play. Bethany watched proudly as her students performed the nativity story, recited poems, and sang songs they had practiced for weeks. Samuel sat in the front row, his face reflecting her pride and joy, occasionally catching her eye with a private smile that made her heart flutter. Afterward, as the community shared refreshments in the church hall, Reverend Thomas approached them. "I was thinking," he said, his kind face serious, "that if you're still planning on the wedding for the day after tomorrow, we might combine it with the Christmas service. The church will already be decorated, and most folks will be in town anyway." Bethany glanced at Samuel, who nodded his agreement. "That sounds perfect," she said. "Thank you, Reverend." 2 days, Samuel murmured as the minister moved away to speak with other parishioners. Just 2 more days. Christmas Day was spent at the Diamond G, with Martha serving a feast that could have fed the entire town: roast goose, ham, potatoes, vegetables from her root cellar, 3 kinds of pie, and Christmas pudding brought all the way from England by the general store owner's wife. Samuel presented Bethany with her wedding gift early, a delicate gold watch that had belonged to his mother, its case engraved with intertwined roses. "It should have gone to Emma," Bethany protested, even as she admired the beautiful timepiece. "Emma insisted you should have it," Samuel replied. "She said she already has too many reminders of Mother, and besides, she'll be here tomorrow to tell you herself." The news that Samuel's sister would arrive in time for the wedding was the best gift Bethany could have received. "I can't wait to meet her," she said sincerely. "From everything you've told me, I know we'll be friends." Bethany's gift to Samuel was more modest: a leather-bound journal she had ordered from Denver, its cover stamped with his initials. "For all the stories you tell," she explained as he ran his fingers over the fine leather. "So they'll be preserved for our children and grandchildren." The following morning dawned clear and cold, a perfect Wyoming winter day. Bethany woke early in her cottage, her heart racing with anticipation. Today she would become Mrs. Samuel Garrett, a change of identity that once would have terrified her, but now filled her with joy. In joining her life with Samuel's, she wasn't losing herself but gaining a partner who valued and supported her true nature. Emma Garrett Baker arrived mid-morning, accompanied by her husband James. 7 months pregnant, she nonetheless embraced Bethany with enthusiasm, her resemblance to Samuel striking despite her feminine features. "I've been so eager to meet the woman who captured my brother's heart," she said, holding Bethany at arm's length to study her. "And I can see why he fell in love with you. You have intelligence in your eyes and strength in your spirit." "Thank you," Bethany replied, instantly warming to this forthright woman. "I've looked forward to meeting you as well. Samuel speaks of you with such affection." "That big softy," Emma said with a fond smile. "He pretends to be all business, but he's got the kindest heart of any man I've ever known." She patted her rounded belly. "We're hoping for a boy to name after him, though we haven't told him that yet." The women spent the morning preparing for the ceremony, with Martha and Mrs. Wilson joining them to help Bethany dress. The cream satin gown, with its high neck and fitted bodice, complemented Bethany's slender figure perfectly. Her hair was arranged in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck, adorned with a small wreath of winter holly and white ribbons. "You look beautiful," Emma declared when they had finished. "My brother won't know what hit him." The church was filled to capacity when Bethany arrived, escorted by Judge Wilson in lieu of her father. Christmas greenery adorned every surface, and candles cast a warm glow over the assembled community. Samuel waited at the altar, his back straight, his face solemn until he turned and saw her. The love that transformed his expression in that moment was so naked, so profound, that Bethany felt tears spring to her eyes. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, with Reverend Thomas speaking of partnership, mutual respect, and the sacred bond of marriage. When Samuel placed a gold band on Bethany's finger, his grandmother's, he had told her earlier his hands were steady, his voice clear as he repeated the vows. Bethany's own voice trembled slightly with emotion as she promised to love, honor, and cherish this man who had become her whole world. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thomas declared, beaming at the couple. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Garrett." Samuel's kiss was gentle, mindful of their audience, but it contained a promise of passion to come that sent heat coursing through Bethany's body. When they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Samuel Garrett, the applause was deafening, the joy on the faces of their friends and neighbors a reflection of their own happiness. The reception at the community hall lasted well into the evening, with food and drink flowing freely, music and dancing, speeches and toasts. Bethany moved through it all in a happy daze, Samuel never far from her side, his hand often finding hers as if to reassure himself that she was real, that she was truly his wife. As the celebration began to wind down, Samuel leaned close to her ear. "Ready to go home?" he asked, his voice low and intimate. Home. Such a simple word, but so laden with meaning. Home was no longer her small cottage in town or the Diamond G ranch house. Home was wherever they were together. "Yes," she replied, meeting his gaze with equal desire. "I'm ready." They said their goodbyes, accepting final congratulations and well wishes, then slipped out into the cold night. Samuel had arranged for a sleigh to take them to the ranch, where they would spend their wedding night before moving temporarily into the teacher's cottage until their new house was complete. The ride through the starlit night, wrapped in furs against the cold, was magical. Samuel's arm around her shoulders kept Bethany warm, his occasional kisses warming her further despite the freezing air. When they arrived at the ranch, Martha had already departed for her sister's house, leaving them completely alone. A fire burned in the bedroom fireplace, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Candles had been lit on the bedside tables, their soft light creating an intimate atmosphere. On the bed, turned down invitingly, someone, probably Martha, had scattered pine needles and holly berries, their fresh scent filling the air. "Welcome home, Mrs. Garrett," Samuel said softly, closing the bedroom door behind them. Bethany turned to face him, suddenly shy despite her anticipation. "I like the sound of that," she admitted. "Mrs. Garrett." Samuel crossed to her, his hands gentle as he began removing the pins from her hair, letting the auburn waves fall around her shoulders. "So do I," he murmured, his fingers threading through the silky strands. "But I like the sight of you even more." What followed was a night of discovery and passion, of tenderness and desire fulfilled. Samuel was gentle yet ardent, guiding Bethany through her first experience of physical love with patience and care. For her part, Bethany found that her natural curiosity and deep love for her husband overcame any initial hesitation, allowing her to participate fully in their union. Afterward, lying in Samuel's arms as the fire burned low and the candles guttered, Bethany felt a sense of completion she had never known was possible. This was what she had been seeking without knowing it, not just independence, not just escape from an unwanted marriage, but a love that respected her mind and spirit while celebrating her body. "What are you thinking?" Samuel asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Bethany smiled, pressing a kiss to his chest where his heart beat steady and strong. "I'm thinking that when I was too weak to stand, you offered me your strength, but you never tried to carry me, you just helped me find my own strength again." Samuel's arms tightened around her. "You were never truly weak, Bethany. Injured, yes. Temporarily unable to stand, yes. But I saw your strength from the first moment in your eyes, in the way you refused to give up." "We're stronger together," Bethany observed, nestling closer to his warmth. "Yes," Samuel agreed, his voice dropping to a whisper against her hair. "Together." And so they remained, through all the years that followed through the completion of their house, the birth of their children, Daniel first, then Beth 2 years later, followed by Emma and finally little Joseph. Through drought years and abundant harvests, through Bethany's continued teaching career and Samuel's expansion of the Diamond G into one of the territory's most successful ranches. Through joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge, they stood together, each supporting the other, their love the foundation upon which they built a life of extraordinary richness. Many years later, when their children were grown with families of their own, and their grandchildren played in the same creek where Samuel and Bethany had shared their first picnic, an elderly couple could often be seen riding side by side across the Diamond G. Those who knew them would smile at the sight, for the love between Samuel and Bethany Garrett had become the stuff of local legend, a love born in a moment of weakness that became a lifetime of strength. And sometimes, when they thought no one was watching, Samuel would still offer his arm to Bethany as they walked, and she would lean on him, not because she needed to, but because she chose to. Because she had learned that true strength isn't found in standing alone, but in knowing when to lean on those who love you, and when to be leaned upon in return.